The smell of fresh cut oak was still in my nose when Brenda Patterson showed up at my property line with a clipboard, and the kind of expression that could curdle milk. I had been running Harrison Timber Services out of rural Pennsylvania for 15 years, delivering quality firewood to customers across 3 counties, and never once had someone complained about when my trucks rolled through their neighborhood until that Tuesday morning in September. "You are in direct violation of Meadowbrook Estates, HOA Regulation 47, subsection D," Brenda announced, her manicured fingernail tapping the laminated page like a woodpecker on crack. "Commercial vehicles are prohibited from entering community roads before 9 in the morning and after 5 in the evening." I wiped my hands on my jeans and squinted at her. The sun was barely up, maybe 7:30, and my delivery driver Marcus had just rolled out with a load for old Mrs. Henderson 3 streets over. She was 83 and needed her firewood stacked before the cold snap hit that weekend. "Madam, I have been delivering to Meadowbrook for 8 years. Nobody ever said anything about time restrictions." Brenda's lips pursed tighter than a snare drum. She was maybe 50, with that specific haircut that seemed to give certain women supernatural powers of complaint. "The regulations were updated 6 months ago. All residents and service providers received notification. I do not live in Meadowbrook. I am running a business that serves your residents, which makes you a service provider." She thrust a document at me. "You are hereby fined $500 for this violation. Subsequent violations will result in $1,000 fines. If you wish to continue servicing Meadowbrook residents, you will adhere to our schedule." I took the paper, reading through the ridiculous jargon. Sure enough, there it was. Commercial vehicles restricted to 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays. The problem was, my entire business model relied on early morning deliveries. I had 12 employees, 8 trucks, and a customer base that expected their firewood before they left for work. Most of my Meadowbrook customers had specifically requested early delivery so they could stack it over the weekend or have it ready when they got home. "This is going to create problems for your residents," I said, keeping my voice level. "More than half my Meadowbrook deliveries are scheduled for 7 to 8:30 a.m. Brenda adjusted her designer sunglasses. "Then I suggest you contact your customers and reschedule. The HOA board voted unanimously on these restrictions. We have had complaints about noise and traffic congestion during early morning hours." "From who?" "That information is confidential." She turned on her heel, her white tennis shoes squeaking on the gravel. "You have 30 days to pay the fine. Good day, Mr. Ingram." I stood there holding that paper like it was contaminated, watching her climb into her spotless Mercedes SUV. The vanity plate read Queen Bee. Of course it did. Marcus came back around noon, confused about why Mrs. Henderson had not been home. Turned out she had a doctor's appointment at 9 and specifically needed the delivery early so her son could stack it before he went to work. Now we would have to make a second trip, wasting gas and time. I called Mrs. Henderson that afternoon to explain the situation and reschedule. Her voice cracked with frustration. "Oh, honey, I specifically chose your service because you could deliver early. My son works until 6, and I cannot stack that wood myself. Can you come tomorrow morning instead?" "Madam, I wish I could, but apparently the HOA has new rules. I can only deliver between 9 and 5. There was a long pause. "Brenda Patterson, I bet. That woman has been making everyone's life miserable since she became HOA president. She gave my neighbor a fine because his mailbox was the wrong shade of black. I am not even kidding." Over the next week, I received similar complaints from 8 other Meadowbrook customers. All of them had specifically requested early delivery. All of them were now inconvenienced by the new restrictions. I tried working within the time frame, but it created a domino effect on my entire schedule. My trucks that used to do 4 deliveries before lunch were now only managing 2. My drivers were working later hours, cutting into their family time. My fuel costs went up because we were making extra trips. Then Brenda hit me with another fine. This time it was because one of my trucks was parked on the street while we unloaded. Apparently, Regulation 62, subsection F stated that commercial vehicles could not remain stationary on Meadowbrook streets for more than 15 minutes. The unloading had taken Marcus 23 minutes because the customer wanted the wood stacked in their backyard, which required hauling it through a narrow gate. Another $500. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. It was held in the Meadowbrook Community Center, a bland building with beige walls and the faint smell of old coffee. About 30 residents sat in folding chairs while Brenda and 4 other board members sat at a long table up front. She wore a blazer that probably cost more than my weekly payroll. When public comments opened, I stood up and introduced myself. I run Harrison Timber Services, and I have been serving Meadowbrook residents for 8 years without incident. These new delivery restrictions are creating significant problems for your residents and my business. I am requesting that the board consider revising the time restrictions, or at least creating exceptions for essential services. Brenda did not even look up from her notes. The restrictions were put in place to maintain community standards and quality of life. Commercial traffic disrupts the peaceful morning atmosphere our residents expect. With respect, madam, the residents I serve have been calling me to complain about not being able to get early delivery anymore. Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Kowalski, the Donnelly family. They all specifically chose my service because of flexible scheduling. A man in the audience raised his hand. He was older, maybe 60, wearing a flannel shirt. I am Tom Donnelly, and what he is saying is true. My wife and I both work. We cannot be home between 9 and 5 to accept firewood delivery. We need it early or on weekends. Brenda's expression tightened. Mr. Donnelly, if you have concerns, you can submit them in writing to the board. We do not debate policy during public comment periods. Then what is the point of public comment? Another voice called out. I recognized her as Mrs. Henderson. Order, please. Brenda banged a gavel. Actually banged a gavel like this was a courtroom. The delivery restrictions stand as written. Service providers who cannot comply are welcome to discontinue service to Meadowbrook. Next item on the agenda. I sat down, my jaw clenched tight. This was not about noise or traffic. This was about control. Brenda Patterson wanted everyone to know she ran Meadowbrook, and anyone who did not play by her rules could take a hike. The third fine came 2 weeks later. One of my drivers, a kid named Jake who was fresh out of high school, had made a delivery at 9:05. According to Brenda's written complaint, the truck had entered the neighborhood at 8:58, which violated the regulation. Never mind that the actual unloading happened after 9. The truck should not have been on Meadowbrook roads 1 second before the allowed time. $1,000 that time. I drove to Brenda's house that evening. She lived in the biggest home in Meadowbrook, a colonial-style mansion with columns and a fountain in the circular driveway. Everything about it screamed excess. I rang the doorbell and waited, rehearsing what I wanted to say. Keep it professional. Stay calm. Find a compromise. Brenda opened the door wearing yoga pants and a wine glass in hand. Mr. Ingram, this is inappropriate. If you wish to communicate with the HOA, you must submit requests through proper channels. Mrs. Patterson, I am not here to argue. I am here to find a solution. These fines are putting a serious strain on my business. I have 8 employees who depend on me. Your residents want my services. There has to be a middle ground." She took a sip of wine. "The middle ground is simple. Follow the regulations. The regulations make it impossible for me to serve your community effectively. Then perhaps you should focus your business elsewhere." She started to close the door. "Wait." I put my hand up, not touching the door but stopping her motion. "What did I do to you? Why are you targeting my business?" Her eyes went cold. "You think too highly of yourself, Mr. Ingram. This is not personal. This is about maintaining standards. Meadowbrook Estates is a premier community, and we will not allow it to become a throughway for commercial traffic at all hours. The board has spoken. If you do not like it, feel free to sue us. We have excellent legal counsel." The door clicked shut in my face. I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at that fountain with its dancing water, and something shifted in my mind. I had been approaching this all wrong. I was trying to fight Brenda's system, trying to make her see reason. But people like her did not care about reason. They cared about power and control. She had created these regulations specifically to squeeze out service providers, probably to make room for whatever companies paid kickbacks to the HOA or had connections with board members. Fine. If Meadowbrook did not want my business, I would take my business elsewhere. But here was the thing that Brenda had not considered. Meadowbrook Estates was not just a customer base for me. It was also my supplier network. The community backed up to state game lands, thousands of acres of forest. I had a contract with the Pennsylvania Game Commission to harvest fallen and dead timber from those lands. My main processing yard was just outside Meadowbrook's boundaries, strategically located, because it gave me easy access to both the forest and the surrounding residential areas. The majority of my firewood came from those game lands. I would cut, split, season, and deliver. It was a perfect setup, and I had spent years building relationships with the Game Commission to maintain that contract. But here was the kicker. The only easy road access to those game lands went through Meadowbrook Estates. The alternative route added 45 minutes each way and went through a neighboring development called Oak Ridge Hollow. Oak Ridge Hollow was smaller, less pretentious, and had no HOA at all. Just regular folks who wanted decent firewood at fair prices and did not care what time my trucks showed up. I spent the next 3 days driving around Oak Ridge and the surrounding areas, mapping out customers who were not in Meadowbrook. Turned out I had quite a few, and there was room for more. I also drove the alternate route to the game land several times, timing it, checking road conditions, calculating fuel costs. It would cost me more in gas and time, but it was workable. Then I started making phone calls. First, I called every single one of my Meadowbrook customers. "This is Harrison Ingram from Harrison Timber Services. I am calling to inform you that due to HOA restrictions, I will no longer be able to provide delivery services to Meadowbrook Estates. I apologize for the inconvenience. I can recommend some other suppliers if you would like." The reactions were predictable. Anger, frustration, confusion. Mrs. Henderson cried. Tom Donnelly cursed. Several people said they would complain to the HOA board. I thanked them and gave them the names of 2 competing suppliers, both of which charged higher prices and had worse customer service reviews, but that was not my problem anymore. Then I called the Game Commission. "This is Harrison Ingram. I need to discuss modifying my timber harvest access route. Instead of using the Meadowbrook entrance, I would like to start using the northern access through Oak Ridge Hollow." The forestry manager, a guy named Dave who I had known for years, was confused. "That is going to add a lot of drive time to your operation, Harry. Why switch? HOA issues." Not worth the headaches, Dave chuckled. Say no more. I will process the paperwork. Should take about 2 weeks. Perfect. The next step was the most important. I contacted every firewood supplier within 50 miles. Most of us knew each other, belonged to the same trade associations, sometimes shared equipment or helped each other out during busy seasons. I explained the situation with Meadowbrook and made a simple request. If anyone from Meadowbrook Estates called looking for firewood delivery, maybe mention that you are booked up for the season, or quote them a really high price, or just say you do not service that area. I was not forcing anyone. Just asking favors from guys who understood what it was like to deal with nightmare HOAs, and every single one of them agreed. Some even had their own Brenda Patterson stories from other developments. The firewood supplier network was tight-knit, and word traveled fast. Then I waited. The first cold snap of October hit hard, dropping temperatures into the 30s at night. That was when people started panicking about their winter firewood supply. I got a dozen calls from former Meadowbrook customers asking if I had changed my mind. I politely declined and reminded them I had recommended other suppliers. We tried them, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice tight with worry. Brennan's Firewood said they are booked until December. Davis Timber quoted me $400 for a cord. That is double what you charge. Nobody else even returns my calls. I am sorry, Mrs. Henderson. I wish I could help, but the HOA fines made it financially impossible for me to continue servicing Meadowbrook. This is ridiculous. I have lived here for 30 years and I have never seen such nonsense. I felt bad for her and the other residents who were genuinely good people caught in Brenda's power trip, but I had a business to protect. Besides, they had the power to change their HOA leadership if they wanted. They just had to use it. By mid-October, my phone was ringing constantly. Not just from customers, but from Meadowbrook residents who had never used my service before but heard through the neighborhood grapevine that nobody could get firewood delivered. The desperation was palpable. People were offering to pay double, triple my normal rates. I turned them all down. My business did not suffer at all. In fact, it grew. Oak Ridge Hollow and the surrounding communities welcomed me with open arms. I picked up 20 new customers within 3 weeks, all of them happy to work with my schedule. No HOA restrictions, no fines, no Brenda Patterson standing at my property line with a clipboard. My drivers were happier, my costs stabilized, and I was delivering quality firewood to people who actually appreciated the service. Then the angry letters started arriving. The first one was from Brenda personally, sent via certified mail. It was full of legal-sounding language threatening me with a lawsuit for economic interference and conspiracy to deny services to Meadowbrook residents. I forwarded it to my lawyer, a sharp woman named Rita who had helped me with business contracts before. She called me the next day, laughing. "Harry, this is garbage. You have every right to choose where you do business. You are not a utility company or an essential service. You can refuse to deliver to anyone for any reason as long as it is not discriminatory based on protected classes. An HOA is not a protected class. So I am good. You are golden. If she actually sues, we will countersue for harassment and abuse of process. She will back down." The second letter came from the HOA board, signed by all 5 members. It demanded that I resume services to Meadowbrook immediately and threatened to report me to the Pennsylvania Attorney General for unfair business practices. Again, Rita laughed it off. But the third communication was the most interesting. It was an email from a Meadowbrook resident named Kyle Morrison. He was not asking for firewood. He was asking if I would be willing to testify at an emergency HOA meeting where residents were trying to vote Brenda out as president. I called him immediately. "Tell me more." Kyle sounded exhausted. "Brenda has been abusing her position for 2 years, but the Firewood situation is the last straw. People are genuinely worried about heating their homes this winter. She has refused to acknowledge that her regulations caused this problem. A group of us have collected enough signatures to call for a special election to remove her and 2 other board members. We are also planning to file complaints with the county about HOA fund mismanagement." Mismanagement. We have been digging into the HOA finances since this started. Turns out Brenda has been approving contracts with her brother-in-law's landscaping company at inflated rates. She also authorized $20,000 for new entrance signage without getting competitive bids. The treasurer finally grew a spine and started sharing documents with us. This was getting interesting. "When is the meeting?" "Next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Will you come?" "Absolutely." The Meadowbrook Community Center was packed that Tuesday night. Every folding chair was occupied, and people lined the walls. I recognized many of my former customers. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. Brenda sat at the board table looking furious. The other 4 board members looked uncomfortable, especially the treasurer, a nervous-looking guy named Paul who kept shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact. Kyle Morrison stood up when the public comment period opened. He was younger than I expected, maybe 30, wearing a suit like he had come straight from an office job. "Madam President, the residents of Meadowbrook have lost confidence in your leadership. Your arbitrary enforcement of regulations has created a situation where our community cannot obtain essential services for the winter. We demand your resignation." "Denied," Brenda snapped. "I was elected by the board and will serve my full term." "Then we call for a vote of no confidence." Kyle held up a thick stack of papers. "I have signatures from 62% of Meadowbrook households demanding a special election." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brenda's face flushed red. "Those signatures need to be verified. They already have been, by an independent notary." Kyle placed the stack on the table in front of her. "According to the HOA bylaws, Article 7, Section 3, a petition signed by more than 50% of households requires the board to hold a special election within 30 days. Paul, the treasurer, cleared his throat. "He is correct, Brenda." "I checked the bylaws." Brenda glared at him like she wanted to set him on fire with her mind. "Fine. We will schedule the election, but until then I am still president and my decisions stand." That was when I stood up. "If I may address the board," all eyes turned to me. Brenda's expression could have stripped paint. "Mr. Ingram, how nice of you to attend." "Mrs. Patterson, I want to make something clear for everyone here. I did not stop servicing Meadowbrook because I wanted to. I stopped because your regulations and fines made it financially impossible. I was charged $2,000 in fines over the course of 3 weeks for minor violations of rules that did not exist when I started serving this community. I run a small business with 8 employees. I cannot afford to pay thousands in arbitrary fines while also trying to provide affordable services to your residents." An older woman I did not recognize stood up. "Brenda, is this true? Did you fine this man $2,000? He violated clearly posted regulations," Brenda said coldly. "What about the other suppliers?" Tom Donnelly called out. "Why will nobody deliver to Meadowbrook now?" I decided to be honest. "Because I told them what happened to me. The Firewood supplier community is small and we talk. When one of us gets harassed by an HOA, word spreads. Nobody wants to take on the liability of working in a development where the leadership is hostile to service providers." The room erupted. People were shouting questions at Brenda, arguing with each other, demanding answers. It took 5 minutes of gavel banging to restore order. Paul the treasurer raised his hand timidly. "I have something to add." Brenda turned on him. "Paul, do not." "I am sorry, Brenda, but I have to." He looked at the crowd, his voice shaking. "I have been reviewing the HOA financial records, and there are some serious irregularities. Over the past 2 years, we have paid Patterson Landscaping Services almost $90,000 for grounds maintenance. That company is owned by Brenda's brother-in-law. The average HOA our size pays about $30,000 annually for similar services." The room went dead silent. "That is slander," Brenda hissed. "Patterson Landscaping provides premium services." "Then why did not we get competitive bids?" Paul pulled out a folder. "I have invoices here for things like $1,500 to trim 3 bushes, $800 to pressure wash the entrance sign, and $6,000 to plant flowers that died within a month. Some of these invoices do not even have detailed descriptions of work performed." Kyle Morrison was on his feet again. "Paul, are you saying Brenda has been embezzling HOA funds?" "I am saying there needs to be an audit." Paul looked directly at Brenda. "I have already contacted the Pennsylvania Bureau of Consumer Protection and filed a complaint. They are opening an investigation." Brenda stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "You had no authority to do that." "I am the treasurer. I have every authority to report financial misconduct." Paul's voice was stronger now, like he had found his backbone. "I should have done it months ago." The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Brenda stormed out, followed by 2 of the other board members. The remaining board members, including Paul, stayed behind to answer questions from residents. I slipped out quietly, feeling like I had just watched a controlled demolition. Kyle Morrison caught up with me in the parking lot. "Thank you for coming. Your testimony helped." "Happy to help." "What happens now?" "We hold the special election in 3 weeks. I am running for president along with 2 other candidates. Paul is staying on as treasurer. We are going to clean house." "What about the state investigation?" Kyle's expression darkened. "That is going to take longer, but Paul documented everything meticulously. If even half of what he found is legitimate fraud, Brenda is looking at criminal charges." I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The situation had been stressful and cost me money, but it had also exposed corruption that might have continued for years if Brenda had not overplayed her hand with the delivery restrictions. 3 weeks later, Kyle Morrison won the special election by a landslide. One of his first acts as new HOA president was to eliminate the commercial vehicle time restrictions and send me a formal letter of apology on behalf of the Meadowbrook board. He also invited me to resume services to the community with no penalties. I considered it. I really did. But by then, I had built up such a strong customer base in Oak Ridge and the surrounding areas that I did not need Meadowbrook anymore. My trucks were running at capacity, my employees were happy, and I was not dealing with HOA nonsense. So I sent Kyle a polite letter declining the offer, but thanking him for reaching out. The Pennsylvania Bureau of Consumer Protection investigation took 6 months. I did not follow it closely, but Kyle kept me updated. They found that Brenda had approved over $120,000 in payments to her brother-in-law's company over a 2-year period, most of which was for inflated or non-existent services. She had also authorized several other questionable expenditures, including a $20,000 sculpture for the community entrance that nobody remembered approving. In March of the following year, Brenda Patterson was charged with theft by unlawful taking, securing execution of documents by deception, and conflict of interest violations. Her brother-in-law was charged as a co-conspirator. The local newspaper ran the story with her mugshot on the front page. She was wearing the same expression she had worn when she first handed me that violation notice, like the world was inconveniencing her by holding her accountable. She pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for paying full restitution to the HOA and serving 2 years of probation. Her brother-in-law got a similar deal. Both of them had to perform 200 hours of community service. The judge made a point of noting that HOA board members are in positions of trust, and abusing that trust is a serious offense. The Meadowbrook residents filed a civil lawsuit against both of them to recover additional damages and legal fees. Last I heard, they settled out of court. Brenda's big colonial house with the fountain went up for sale. She and her family moved out of state. Kyle Morrison turned out to be a good HOA president. He focused on actual community needs rather than power trips. He renegotiated service contracts, brought in competitive bids, and published detailed financial reports quarterly so residents could see where their money was going. Meadowbrook stopped being known as the Nightmare HOA and started being just another quiet community where people lived their lives. As for me, Harrison Timber Services continued to grow. I hired 2 more drivers and bought another truck. Oak Ridge Hollow became my primary market, and those folks were loyal customers who appreciated good service at fair prices. I never had to deal with another HOA fine or arbitrary regulation, but I did keep one reminder of the whole mess. I framed that first $500 fine from Brenda Patterson and hung it in my office. Whenever I had a tough business decision to make, I would look at that frame and remember that sometimes the best solution is not to fight the system, but to walk away and build something better somewhere else. Mrs. Henderson eventually got her Firewood, by the way. Once Kyle took over, he personally called me and asked if I would make an exception for elderly residents who had been loyal customers. I agreed to that. She was not part of the problem, just caught in the middle of it. I delivered her winter supply myself, stacked it in her backyard, and refused to take payment. She cried and hugged me and made me promise to come back for tea sometime. I kept that promise. Every few months, I would stop by her place for tea and cookies. She would tell me about the latest Meadowbrook gossip, which mostly involved Kyle doing good things like organizing neighborhood cleanups and negotiating better snow removal contracts. It was nice to hear about an HOA actually functioning the way it was supposed to, serving the residents instead of ruling over them. The firewood supply situation in Meadowbrook sorted itself out eventually. Once the hostile regulations were removed and word spread that the HOA was under new management, other suppliers started servicing the area again. Competition returned, prices stayed reasonable, and residents had choices. That was how it should work. I ran into Brenda one more time, about a year after everything went down. I was at a hardware store in the next county over, loading bags of salt into my truck, when I saw her in the parking lot. She was getting into an older sedan, nothing like the Mercedes she used to drive. She saw me too, and for a moment we just stared at each other across the parking lot. I did not say anything. Neither did she. What was there to say? She had abused her power, got caught, and faced consequences. I had protected my business and inadvertently helped expose corruption. The story was over. She got in her car and drove away. I finished loading my salt and went home. The whole experience taught me something important about small-time tyrants like Brenda Patterson. They thrive on people being too afraid or too tired to push back. They count on everyone just accepting their authority and paying the fines and following the ridiculous rules. But the moment someone says no and walks away, the illusion of power starts to crack. And once it starts cracking, other people find the courage to push back too, and the whole thing collapses. I was not a hero. I was just a guy trying to run a business who got pushed too far. But sometimes that is all it takes. One person saying no, making a difficult choice, accepting short-term pain to avoid long-term abuse. The residents of Meadowbrook did the real work of investigating, organizing, and demanding accountability. I just started the ball rolling by refusing to play Brenda's game. My lawyer, Rita, told me I should write a book about the experience. She thought other small business owners would benefit from hearing about how to deal with HOA overreach. I told her maybe someday, but for now I was too busy running my company and delivering firewood to people who actually wanted it. Besides, the best revenge was not telling the story. It was living well. Harrison Timber Services was thriving. My employees were happy. My customers were satisfied. And I never had to see another HOA violation notice again. Well, almost never. A few years later, I was delivering to a new customer in a different development, and a different HOA board member approached me with concerns about where my truck was parked. But this time, I was prepared. I had copies of the delivery regulations for that specific HOA. I had scheduled the delivery within the approved hours, and I had photos documenting exactly where my truck was positioned. The board member looked over everything, nodded, and said, "Looks like you have covered all your bases. Thanks for being thorough." That was it. No drama, no fines, no power trip. Just a normal interaction between a service provider and an HOA representative who understood their actual role. That was the moment I knew things had really changed. The Meadowbrook situation had taught me to document everything, know the rules better than the people enforcing them, and never again let someone like Brenda Patterson push me around. I was not going to be a victim of HOA overreach again. I was going to be a professional who knew his rights and ran his business accordingly. The firewood business is still going strong today. I eventually expanded into tree removal services and landscaping, hiring more crew members and buying more equipment. Harrison Timber Services became one of the most respected companies in the region. We built that reputation on fair prices, quality work, and treating customers with respect. And we never, ever delivered to a community without first reviewing their HOA regulations, documenting everything in writing, and making sure we had legal backing if anything went wrong. That was the Brenda Patterson lesson, and it was worth every penny of those fines to learn it. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I had just paid the fines and adjusted my schedule like Brenda wanted. Maybe I would still be delivering to Meadowbrook, dealing with more and more ridiculous regulations, watching my profit margins shrink while she continued to abuse her power and embezzle HOA funds. Maybe I never would have expanded into Oak Ridge and the other communities that became my best customers. Maybe the corruption in Meadowbrook would have continued unchecked for years. But I did not do that. I made a choice to walk away, to protect my business, to say no to unreasonable demands. And that choice had ripple effects I never could have predicted. It exposed corruption, helped residents take back their community, and taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself. The firewood still smells the same, oak and maple and cherry, that clean scent of cut wood that means winter is coming and people need to stay warm. But the business feels different now, stronger, more resilient, built on a foundation of knowing what I will and will not accept. And somewhere out there, Brenda Patterson is living with the consequences of letting power go to her head, of thinking she could fine and bully her way to respect. She learned the hard way that respect cannot be demanded or enforced. It has to be earned through fair dealing and genuine service to others. As for me, I learned that sometimes the best fight is the one you walk away from. You do not always have to engage with tyrants on their terms. Sometimes you can just take your ball and go home, build something better somewhere else, and let their empire crumble from its own corruption. The last time I saw Mrs. Henderson, she told me that Meadowbrook was the friendliest it had been in years. People were talking to each other again, helping each other out, not living in fear of violation notices and fines. Kyle Morrison had transformed the HOA from a nightmare into what it was supposed to be, a group of neighbors working together to maintain their community. That made me feel good. Not because I had anything to do with Kyle's leadership, but because it proved that change was possible. Communities did not have to accept toxic leadership. Residents had power if they chose to use it. And sometimes all it took was one situation, one problem, one catalyst to wake people up and make them demand better. I was just a firewood delivery guy who refused to pay unjust fines. But that small act of resistance helped expose corruption and gave residents the courage to take action. That is more than enough for me. The wood still needs cutting, splitting, seasoning, and delivering. Customers still need warmth in winter, and I still have a business to run, employees to pay, and a reputation to maintain. The work continues, just like it always has, but now with the hard-won wisdom of knowing when to fight and when to walk away. And I never did write that book Rita suggested. This story, this experience, this lesson stays with me every day in how I run my business and treat my customers. That is worth more than any book advance. The firewood business taught me about more than just oak and maple. It taught me about power, corruption, resistance, and the quiet strength of simply refusing to participate in someone else's game. Those lessons shaped not just my business, but who I became as a person. And every winter, when the first cold snap hits and my trucks roll out with loads of seasoned firewood, I think about that September morning when Brenda Patterson showed up with her clipboard and her fines and her threats. I think about the choice I made to say no. Best decision I ever made.